All right. Hey, everyone. I want to welcome you all to our CPAC Connecticut Youth Advisory Board. Today, we are talking all about back to school success. My name's Michael. I'm here with Allie, Emily, and Jake, and we are all advocates and members of the Youth Advisory Board. So we're really happy you're here with us. And so I'm going to jump right in, and I want to start really asking you all, Emily, this is for you first. What can young adults do to support themselves this school year?
Young adults can support themselves by just giving themselves a break and understanding that even though school has been happening one way for so long, say if they're like in a older grade, like if they're in like upper elementary or something, and they realize that like they're so used to school in one context, but then they realize that school did an entire overhaul and they have to like give themselves understanding and be patient with themselves and just don't expect everything to be on in one timeline.
I love that, Emily. It's really all about acceptance. So Allie, over to you. What can young adults do to support themselves this school year?
I think one thing young adults can do to support themselves this year is to make sure that they schedule in self-care for themselves. Actually, Michael, it was you that taught me that when you when you're making your calendar for the week and you're putting in your classes and you're putting in your sports or like family stuff, commitments, whatever, just as you would put in a block for your appointment or work or whatever, put in a block for yourself and let that really be a time for yourself and not push it off or not reschedule it or not cancel it or anything like that. I think it's important to do because, you know, kids are going back to school and young adults, everyone are going back to school with, you know, some of them are going back in person after the pandemic. Some of them are switching to online. So I think that no matter what form you take your classes, make sure that you take time for yourself.
Mm-hmm. And thanks for bringing that up and reminding me that I told you that, because I do that, but it's helpful to remind us all and our listeners and viewers that, you know, treating yourself like an important client is a great way to really stay on track. And so, Jake, over to you. What can young adults do to support themselves this school year?
So firstly, you should feel proud of all that you have accomplished in your previous school year and stay ready for change. And secondly, getting yourself organized will help you feel in control. Thirdly, identify your support team, and so when you need help, you have the right contacts to reach out to.
That's awesome, Jake. And I think you mentioned two really important things. I think the first thing you mentioned is being proud of yourself, because you're right. I mean, I don't have to tell you all, like the last, year and a half, 2 years has been, I think, to put it politely, like a nightmare. So it's been stressful for everyone. So I think getting to that place of like being okay with where you're at, with finding whatever shred of gratitude you can and really patting yourself on the back. Like we talked about with Allie, you know, putting yourself first on your calendar. So what you're really talking about too is talking to yourself like you would a really good friend. And then the other thing is making sure you have support system in place. So if you have professionals, friends, family, whoever you have in your corner, to make sure maybe it could look like setting up a plan with them or having an open dialogue based on what you need. That's awesome. So Emily, back to you for our next question. How can young adults get support from teachers and other adults? Sorry.
I have a good answer for this one, but I'm not really sure how it really applies because you know, in school, everybody has like, you know, IEPs and teachers have to follow those. And, you know, how in college, it's like in a similar sense, except only your professor and your advisor know about your accommodations. Well, I was thinking that maybe if, you know, the teachers need, I mean, the student needs, and you're gonna edit that part out, right? If the student needs like any sort of like extra like time, like I'm like, for me personally, I knew that if I was having like a rough mental health episode, my sped teachers in my middle school and my high school, they let me just like go to their room and just de-escalate. So like maybe make a plan to have a signal with your teachers or something to that effect if you need like a timeout.
That's awesome. And I think we've had many conversations around school and getting the help you need. And I think what I love about you, Emily, is you're always the first one to be like, talk it out, get a plan, whether it's like through like formal accommodations or you're just having casual conversation with a teacher or professional. I think you're really amazing at reminding everyone, like the answer is always going to be no if you don't ask. So I really
Yeah.
appreciate you mentioning that today.
No.
Allie, can you talk about maybe some ways young adults can get support from teachers and other adults?
Sure. I really like what Emily said about having that like signal or a plan for when you need a break. I wish I had that in school. I definitely didn't have that. Mine, for me, it was more like, oh, go to the counseling center. It was more like shoo shoo instead of, you know, just taking a break when sometimes that's all I needed. I didn't need to go to the counseling center. I could have just, you know, had a break. I think one thing to do is, wait, what was the question again?
No, it's okay. It's how can young adults get support from teachers or other adults?
Young adults can get support from teachers by seeking out ones that you know or have heard about that can be trustworthy. And if it's a new school for you and you don't know anyone or anything, I would start with a counseling center first, and not necessarily a counseling center for your academics, because a lot of times there's in high school, you'll have like a counseling center for your academics and then a counseling center for your, you know, behavioral health or whatever. So I think the behavioral health one is the one that you gotta seek out and just kind of just walk in and say, you know, I'm just scoping it out, you know, you're just observing. And you can even lie and say, like, I'm scoping it out for a friend. They're interested in coming by, and I told them I would check it out first. And, you know, there's nothing wrong with that. And find out about those resources, notice posters, things like that that might be up there. And a way you can get support from other young adults is be transparent and be open-minded and understand that if you share something that may be very important for you and someone else gives you a reaction that maybe upset you or hurt you or, you know, invalidated what you're going through, just know that chances are that person has their own stuff going on too. So it's not about you, and there is somebody out there that would love to hear what you're going through, because chances are someone else is going through it too.
Mm-hmm. You brought up a lot of great points, but before I forget, I think one, and this could be a whole separate conversation for all of us, but I do want to touch on it, is I think you kind of alluded to, Allie, like mental health and taking care of yourself and having a break, whatever you want to call it, is not a punishment. I think we may have had experiences in school where it was viewed more as a punishment. Oh, you're not doing well. Go out to a principal or a counselor. So I think it's reframing that really support should hopefully look like for you in your life and in school, as a positive thing, not as a negative thing. So I think that's part of why we're all in doing the work that we do. Is it's really a big push on wellness and how to move forward as a way to take better care of yourself and accomplish what you want to accomplish. And it's never about like discrimination or being negative. So all right. So Jake, can you talk a little bit about how young adults can get support from teachers and other adults?
Yes, it can. Well, first off, is honesty. Being honest with yourself and also your teachers. Honesty is the best policy for this area. When meeting with your support team, and talk about what you feel is going well, but even more importantly, is speak about where you are struggling. Make sure that you leave the meeting with a plan of action, and that it is a plan that you feel comfortable with.
So Jake, I think what I took away from that is two big things. Is one, you're right, honesty is the best policy, because I think it's a big thing where we never want young adults to feel like they have to share. I think it's within their right to wait till they would like to share, but I think it's also being aware of historically young adults have not always had the chance to really share in a safe space. So I think that's, again, why we're all doing this work. And I think the other thing you mentioned was, really being okay with uncomfortable moments. I think that's sometimes where change can happen. And maybe that it might be uncomfortable to really talk about what's going on with you for the first time if you're not a young adult who's really shared something before, but that's part of that learning process. So thanks for sharing that, Jake. All right, Emily, back to you. So can you talk a little bit about what can young adults do if they are struggling?
I have a loaded answer for this one. What young adults can do is go to their family if possible, or I know that I personally spend a lot of time in my school psychologist's office once a week, every week for like all of middle school and high school. Yeah, definitely go to definitely like get set up with your school's mental health professionals, because they're there to help you like educationally, like with the paperwork side of like special ed, but they're also there like if you're dealing with interpersonal conflict, which if you are like a young adult in middle school, this middle or high school disability or not, you are dealing with that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and Emily, I think what you really brought up too was young adults, you're never alone. I think, especially with social media, because I've been thinking about this a lot too, is like sometimes like on social media and like in the public, there can be a tendency to, like, as I've heard, like social media online shows the highlights. Like I know people who post all the glamorous crap on social media, but I'm like, girl, I saw you yesterday. You were like going through some stuff. So it's the, it's acknowledging like we all deal with things. So I think it's part of that, like we all can be anxious, we all can be going through tough times. So I think it's really normalizing. You really can't do life alone, as I say, and so it's whatever really is going to work for you for support. Allie, can you share a little bit more about any thoughts on what young adults can do if they are struggling?
Sure. What first comes to mind is something that kind of happens just in the moment. So say you may be in a classroom or a setting scenario, whatever, where you can't necessarily walk away or get up or whatever, or leave in that moment. How to just recenter yourself and calm yourself in that moment. And I think one technique I learned was when I have racing thoughts or anxiety or have a hard time centering myself or, overwhelmed, what have you, I will look around the room and I'll go through the colors of the rainbow and I'll try to find like as many items as I can in the room with that color. So if I start with red, I'll try to find everything in the room that's red and then everything in the room that's orange and so on. And just doing that brings me right back into where I am in that moment, and it gives me a chance to kind of slow my heart rate, and I'll also try to breathe at the same time. So I always say, like, try to learn techniques that can help you in actual like moment in itself where you might be feeling overwhelmed, but also you can also share what you're going through with someone else. Shame storms hate when you share your story because it destroys them and it gives an opportunity for connection. So I often tell people, chances are if you lean on someone else and open up about how you're feeling, you don't necessarily have to say exactly what you're going through rather than what you're feeling. You can say, I'm going through some things right now I can't really talk about, but the feelings that are coming out of them is XYZ. And I just am trying to navigate that. Just saying that alone, people can usually be like, oh yeah, I remember when I felt that emotion one time too. And I ended up, and this is what I did with it. And before you know it, you formed a connection.
That's awesome. And I think you brought up a lot of good points. And I think I first want to just kind of wrap up the point that you talked about skills you can do on your own. And, we have lots of educational content on our CPAC Young Adult section. You can definitely include a link in this video posting. But I think whether you learn it from a clinician, a friend, books, wherever, I think you made the great point of the difference that support doesn't always look like just talking things out. If you're a young adult who also would like to learn ways to have more coping skills, so when you are doing whatever, work, school, life, what have you, you have those tools in your tool belt, so to speak. So just a little public service that support is not always sharing every little thing. So thanks for bringing that up, Callie. Jake, can you share a little bit about what young adults can do if they are struggling?
Of course. This goes along with the previous question. It is important to have a plan established in advance of running into a problem. If you begin to struggle, you should be able to refer to the plan and reach out to your support team before it becomes overwhelming.
You're right, Jake. I think like we were talking about, I think knowing who can be in your corner and knowing who you can turn to for what. Like I have someone I could turn to for like practical things. I have someone I could turn for like emotional support. So I think even if young adults want to break down, like if I'm struggling with XYZ, it's like having that list broken down. But I think you also brought up the great point that really opening up earlier on, because you're never a bother. Like we all were talking about, people want to help you, so it's not bottling it up and it's not waiting until you're really struggling. So thanks for bringing that up, Jake. That really young adults should definitely be open and honest and upfront if possible.
Cool.
Emily, can you talk a little bit about if there's anything you want to say to teachers, parents, other professionals who may work with students or other young adults?
Something that I want to say to teachers and other professionals is to just like see the person as a person and their disability as like a huge part of themselves, because a lot of times professionals, even in my own experience, will just see my wheelchair and just see like my other disabilities without seeing me as a person without other parts of my life. And that's just mind blowing to me. I don't know if this counts, but like when I met my college advisor, just by looking at me, he would never know that I speak so articulate. Just by looking at like on my file, he never would have thought that I was as articulate as I am. So professionals really need to realize that if you're a disabled person, you're not just a disabled person, you're also any other adjective that you are. Like you have a, like, I don't think a lot of people realize that there are different aspects of disabled people's lives.
No, I think that I always love when you share this, Emily, because it's so true. I think two key points is one, you're right. We are all people, we are all complete individuals, and we all have authority over our own lives and what we want in our life. So I really like that you always mention that, is really breaking down the discrimination and the stigma. And then the other the key point is reminding professionals it's not fun to talk about maybe, but it's got to be said. We all may have implicit biases. So I really appreciate you sharing and reminding teachers and professionals that we're not any case notes in a file. We're more than that. And so I just really appreciate you making that point to just be honest, be vulnerable. If you do work with young adults, really of any young adults, really people, of course, everyone, but just being aware and treating every person who comes through your door with respect. So thanks for sharing, Emily.
No problem.
Allie, can you talk about anything you'd like to say to teachers, parents, professionals, anyone who works with or supports young adults or students?
Sure. One thing is, I love what Emily said about that people have more than school going on in their lives. A lot of times teachers assume because a kid seems like they have it all together, quote, a lot of times they don't, and you have no idea what's going on behind closed doors. You have no idea what's going on at home or in their social life. And I always tell teachers, keep in mind that just because they're young doesn't necessarily mean inexperienced. Sure, they may be inexperienced in things like buying a home or managing bills or something like that, but then again they might not. I know young adults and teens that do support their families. They do go to work and contribute to the home because they have to. And so I just always encourage teachers to pay attention to the student more than just their grade, more than what other teachers may say about them. And especially if you have a family, if you have the sibling of a previous student, I always remember the talks of, oh boy, there's the Jane Doe kids, and it's like that kills that just crushes someone's self-esteem and their personality and individuality. And as a sibling who was proud of my sibling no matter what, even when they were struggling and I've had teachers kind of mumble that, I knew I thought to myself, well, so what? He's still the greatest, bad kid in the world. So I always tell teachers, just try to keep in mind that students are so much more than their grade book grade and their family reputation and things like that. Everyone's their own person.
Thanks for sharing, Allie. I think a couple things is one, you mentioned really, not bottling things up. I was a student too who would like try to look together, look perfect, but on the inside, like I was beyond struggling, and I would be the classic case of Michael looked fine, Michael looked fine. Then like one day I snap and I have like a meltdown. And so like I totally get where you're coming from on that. And I think the other thing you mentioned that I want to talk about for a second is you're right. I think the world is more complicated than adults may realize for young adults. And so I don't know how many young adults and teachers think students today are just eating cookies and watching TV all day after school, but it's certainly not the students, young adults I know. So you're right, it's being aware of, you don't know what someone's going through. Like you talked about, they could be a primary caretaker, emotional support. And I think until you have those conversations and ask those curious questions, hey, how you doing? And building that relationship, you're never going to know. And so I think I really appreciate you taking the time to mention that, because I'm not trying to say there's always a magic bullet, but I think often what can really help a young adult, as you're all hearing, is relationships and being kind and curious and just opening that door for connection. So thanks for sharing, Allie. Jake, is there anything you want to share, say to teachers, parents, or professionals who work with young adults or students?
Yes, there is. Here is the voice. And do not think you know what they need before you even understand what they are going through. It may be hard for them to share how they are feeling, so please validate that.
I love that, Jake. I think the validation and just not making assumptions. We all know the classic quote on assumptions, right? So if you don't, you can look that up. So I think that's great. But I also want to mention for any professionals watching, I think it's really a two-way street. I think you'll probably find the more open and understanding you are about your students, the more they'll give you the same back. So I don't want this to ever come across like, like some kind of way, but I think, and what I've seen is like, it's always the teachers and professionals who are like really understanding are the ones that just, it's like magic, right? Like the ones that have that natural respect. And so if you are a professional who's going through something, and I get it, the last couple years have been tough with COVID and everything going on. So all this talk about self-care and understanding applies to professionals too. So I think it's really all about that awareness and understanding and support. So thanks for sharing that, Jake. And we're getting to our final question here. So Emily, can you talk a little bit about if there's anything you want to say to students and young adults who might be watching this?
I think I want to say to students and young adults that may be watching is that, like, even though, professionals, like teachers may think that, oh, you don't have anything to like worry about or anything, is that the interpersonal and social and academic struggles that you go through are like valid. And I've had experiences where teachers just love to invalidate like our experiences just because we're young, and especially because if you have a disability, they think that they shelter you enough where that doesn't happen, and that's not true. Like the bottom line is to validate students.
Thanks for sharing that, Emily. You're right. It's some of those simple things that on paper I'm like, why doesn't everyone do this? But it's the simple versus easy. And so everyone listening, please find a way to if you work with young adults or students, please find a way to just kind of try something new. If you're used to talking with young adults a certain way and it's not really working, try something different. Allie, is there anything you want to share to young adults and students who might be watching this?
Yeah, just be yourself. There were so many years that I didn't spend being showing my true personality or only showing a certain amount of it around certain people, and I regret that a lot. I think if I didn't worry so much about what other people thought, then I would have been able to enjoy a lot of in the now moments that I missed out on. So, and that it's okay to make mistakes. Mistakes happen, and it's what's important is to not beat yourself up over it and get stuck in a shame cycle.
I really appreciate that, Allie. I think the two things I'm taking away from that is one, you are not your mistakes. So, and then the other thing is, really it's being in the now. I think especially for students, there can be so much focus on goals, your next assignment, your next test, your next this, your next that. And so it's great to achieve those and keep on track for them. But I think you made a great point of not like living in those goals and taking time to be present. And I think really balancing those. So thanks for sharing that, Allie. So Jake, over to you. Is there anything you'd like to say to students and young adults who might be watching this?
There is, yes. Well, first of all, you need to realize that you are not alone, no matter what circumstances you may be in. There are people that want to support you and find other people and peers and build their support system.
I love that, Jake. I couldn't have said it any better myself. It's really all about that peer support, finding someone who cares, because there are people who care, and just not being alone in your struggles. There's always someone out there who can really help you. And so really with that, we finish all of our questions. Again, I'm Michael here with Allie, Jake, and Emily here for the CPAC Youth Advisory Board. We want to thank you for being here with us. I think we learned a lot today, a lot of great ways to support young adults and students, support professionals. We'll be doing a lot more of activities as always, but especially during our back to school month for September. Be on the lookout for new resources, including a meeting prep sheet, and lots more to come. All right, everyone. Thanks for joining us and take care. Bye.